American manufacturers will never say this publicly, but Chinese outboards are eating into their sales fast. When boaters can get similar horsepower for thousands less, the industry cannot ignore it. On paper, the gap can be $5, $6, even $7,000 on a mid-range repower. The strange part isn't the price. It's how these motors are suddenly showing up on boats that used to carry nothing but big brand badges. And why some mechanics privately admit the gap is not where you think. If you run a boat, buy used, or depend on your engine for real hours, what is happening right now affects you directly. So how did these outboards get this cheap? And why are some this good? To understand that, we need to look at the factories that were never supposed to build them. The shortcut. That changed the market. For decades, most boaters could list the big outboard brands by memory, and most of those were American or Japanese. The names shifted over time, but the pattern stayed. Big companies investing heavily in new engine platforms, testing them for years, and selling them through tight dealer networks. Meanwhile, along China's coast, factories took a quieter path. First, they built parts castings, brackets, small machined components for the very brands found on Western docks. Then, as margins tightened and demand grew, some of those same factories began copying entire engines, not redesigning copying. An old Japanese or American block from the 1980s might be scanned, modeled, and reproduced with different paint and a new name. This strategy didn't need large engineering teams or expensive test fleets. It relied on existing patterns, decent tooling, and the same basic alloys and electronics. Research and development costs dropped. Regulatory certification could be delayed or bypassed entirely, and in that absence, a new advantage emerged: low prices. China's dense industrial clusters helped accelerate it. Foundries, plastics factories, electronics shops, and logistics hubs all sit close together. That proximity meant a cloned engine design could be turned into a finished product quickly and at scale. For buyers comparing engines online, the appeal is clear. On one tab, an American four-stroke with warranty, dealer support, and a price that rivals the boat itself. On the other, a Chinese outboard promising the same horsepower for half the cost. On paper, it looks like the same engine. In some ways, it is. That's how the global market shifted quietly, and with very little resistance, until it became time to ask what wasn't copied, what couldn't be cloned, and what might not survive the seasons ahead. The honeymoon phase. Most owners remember, if you have ever unpacked a brand new Chinese outboard, the first impression is hard to argue with. It looks clean. Everything is where it should be. Once mounted on the transom and hooked to fuel and cables, it usually starts right up. No fuss. That early success is partly by design. Most modern Chinese outboards are built around old, proven engine layouts, mostly cloned from Japanese blocks that stopped production decades ago. They use simple carburetors or basic fuel injection, fewer sensors, and very little computer logic. There's nothing particularly clever inside, and that's part of the charm. Fewer electronics means fewer reasons not to run. Weak battery, old spark plug, the engine shrugs. It doesn't throw codes or lock itself out. For the average lake boater, someone running a 14-foot skiff a few weekends per year, the simplicity can feel like durability. Everything's still fresh too. Paint is unscarred, coatings are untouched, mounts and bushings are quiet, fasteners haven't seized. And at the launch ramp, when someone asks how much it cost, the answer usually draws a raised eyebrow. Half the price, works fine. What's not to like? That phase is what many owners remember and share. If the motor is used lightly, in clean fresh water, and lives on a trailer, it may never give reason to complain. It might last 5 or 6 seasons before the boat is sold or replaced. In that time, it feels like a smart buy. That is why the praise is often real. Not fake, not marketing, just incomplete. The problems, when they show up, tend to arrive after that early shine fades. long after the seller's inbox goes silent. But in the beginning, most stories sound the same: easy, cheap, and good enough. If this makes you look at your own outboard a little differently, tap subscribe and stick with us. What the engine doesn't show you. Beneath the decals and fresh paint, every engine tells a second story, one written in metal and tolerances. In American factories, the story begins with alloy. Cylinder heads and blocks are made from carefully selected materials. Heat treatments are applied, grain structures are refined, and every step is aimed at survival. Thousands of hours, repeated salt exposure, heavy vibration. Samples are tested and cut open long before anything reaches a consumer. This shows up in the price. You pay more because the engine was designed not just to run, but to last. Heads resist cracking. Blocks don't fatigue. Threads hold torque 10 years in. You're not buying immortality, but you're buying better odds. In a lower-cost Chinese factory, the focus is different. Castings meet dimensions, but alloys vary. Gas pockets, porosity, uneven grain flow, all common in budget castings. Those flaws don't prevent the engine from running, but under stress, over time, they change how and when it fails. Then there's machining. On American lines, every bore, deck, and journal is measured and logged. Deviations are flagged or scrapped. The tolerances are tight for a reason. In cheaper production, gauges might be manual, sampling looser, tolerances wider. It still runs. But the head gasket works harder. The rings don't seat quite right. Gears mesh with more load. The result is subtle at first. Small oil leaks, bearings that wear early, noise that wasn't there before. For light users, it may never matter. But if the boat sees chop, tide, and time, the consequences add up. That's why seasoned mechanics talk in probabilities. They've seen Chinese clones last longer than anyone expected, and American motors fail early. But over time, the failures lean one way, not because the engine was bad, but because it was never built for the kind of life some owners gave it. Salt, coatings, and seasons that never make it into ads. Very little in boating is as patient and relentless as salt. Consider two identical hulls in the same brackish marina. One wears an American mid-range outboard. The other mounts a low-cost Chinese engine of similar claimed horsepower. Both motors are rinsed occasionally, as most owners claim to do. Both are left in the water for long stretches because hauling is inconvenient, and lifts are not cheap. On the American engine, the underwater parts were part of a carefully tested coating system. The raw aluminum housing was treated, then primed with a product chosen to adhere to that specific treatment, then painted with a finish that survived hours of accelerated salt spray testing. The bolts and screws that hold it all together are marine-grade stainless steel with enough nickel and other elements to resist rapid surface corrosion. Sacrificial anodes were sized after real-world testing on fleet boats. On the Chinese engine, the picture depends heavily on the factory. Some exporters have taken corrosion seriously, others have not. In the worst cases, a lower unit might see nothing more than a quick surface preparation, a thin primer, and a cosmetic paint layer meant to survive shipping and the first year or two of use. Fasteners may be called stainless steel, but use cheaper compositions, more prone to staining and seizing. Anode placement may be copied loosely from older designs rather than optimized through trial. After several seasons in that marina, the difference is not subtle to anyone who has spent time under boats. The American gear case may have scratches from rocks and bunks, but the paint still lies flat, and the aluminum beneath anodes remains mostly intact. The Chinese gear case may show bubbling around edges, flaking near seams, and pitting close to seals. Bolts might resist a wrench or break when turned. Anodes may have vanished quickly without fully protecting the housing. Once corrosion reaches the surfaces where seals ride, water begins to infiltrate the gear oil passages. At first, that shows up as a little milkiness in drained oil, easy to miss if service is skipped or rushed. Over time, the gears run in a mix of oil and emulsified water, bearings pit, and shafts lose their polish. When the owner finally hears the grinding and feels the vibration, the cost to fix the damage can rival the original price of the entire engine. On a high-end American unit, replacing a gear case hurts, but the engine often still has enough value to justify the repair. On a low-cost Chinese outboard, the same bill convinces many owners to call the motor disposable. Whatever savings they felt on the day they bought the engine have been quietly erased by a failure that began years earlier, beneath the paint. What happens when something finally breaks? Metal and coatings tell one side of the story. Human infrastructure tells the other. Imagine again, two owners with engines that suddenly refuse to start. This time, on the first truly warm weekend of the year. Neither of them has the time or interest to perform deep diagnostics on their own. The owner of the American outboard calls a nearby dealer. The brand has invested heavily in building and keeping that network alive. The service writer looks up the engine by serial number and pulls a history of bulletins, known issues, and parts diagrams. There is a process for checking warranty coverage, an ordering system connected to regional warehouses, and delivery times measured in days rather than months. None of that is free, which is part of why the engine cost more at the start. But in this moment, the benefit is tangible. The owner of the Chinese outboard may have a different experience. The seller could be an online importer with no local shop, a warehouse that mostly moves boxes, or a small dealer who sells a catalog of brands but stocks few parts. The warranty process might require emailed photographs, videos, and long exchanges with support staff who are working in another time zone. The needed part might be on a shelf in another country, in a container on the water, or still on a production schedule that has already slipped. While that is sorted out, the boat sits. A string of clear weekends comes and goes. If the boat was more than a toy, if it supported a small charter business or a guide service, the downtime translates into cancellations and refunds. Paper receipts rarely show these losses. Yet, for many owners, the cost of not being able to use the boat when they need it ends up being the most painful part of the ownership experience. It is an expense paid in missed trips and frayed patience, rather than in line items. That difference in support is not a moral failing on either side. It is an almost inevitable result of the two business models. One builds and maintains a dense service network and stocks warehouses, then bakes those costs into the price of every engine. The other keeps prices low by trimming everything that happens after the crate leaves the loading dock. Fuel, maintenance, and the ledger you do not see all at once. Beyond the initial bill and the obvious repairs, outboards drain money through fuel and upkeep. Modern American four-stroke engines are built under strict emissions rules. To meet those standards, manufacturers use carefully calibrated fuel injection and ignition control. Electronic management systems watch sensors, adjust timing and mixture, and keep combustion as efficient as possible across a wide range of loads and conditions. Developing and certifying these systems is expensive and ongoing. That effort nudges the sticker price upward, but it also nudges fuel consumption downward. Over a single weekend, burning a little less fuel per hour hardly registers. Spread over years of regular use, especially for high-hour operators, the difference becomes harder to ignore. A boat that saves even a modest amount of fuel each hour can, over a decade, recoup a surprisingly large portion of the premium paid for the engine. Many Chinese outboards lean on simpler systems. Carburetors and basic non-adaptive injection are cheaper to build, easier to understand, and less dependent on proprietary diagnostic tools. For owners who like to tinker or who operate far from service centers, that simplicity can be attractive. The trade is that such systems rarely match the fine-tuned efficiency of engines built to current emissions targets. They tend to burn more fuel for the same work. Maintenance costs tell a similar story. An American outboard from a major brand usually has service parts available from multiple sources. Official dealers carry filters, impellers, gaskets, and plugs designed specifically for that engine. Aftermarket suppliers compete on price and sometimes on quality. Maintenance schedules are based on real-world fleets and controlled testing. When a careful owner follows those guidelines, the engine's odds of running well into high hours improve. For lower-volume Chinese engines, finding high-quality parts can be more difficult. Some components are interchangeable with the older designs they copy. Others are not. Gasket sets from third-party vendors may fit loosely. Rubber parts may age faster than expected. If an owner stretches intervals because parts are hard to source or substitutes whatever seems close, the engine's buffer against failure shrinks without any obvious warning. The critical point is not that one path is always wrong and the other is always right. It is that the true cost of owning any engine is a combination of purchase, fuel, upkeep, and downtime. Those sums do not arrive on a single invoice. They arrive as a series of small decisions and quiet consequences. By the time you add them all together, the outboard that once looked unquestionably cheaper can feel much more complicated. Drop a like if this is the moment you would start shopping for a different motor. Where Chinese outboards actually make sense. If you stopped at failures and hidden costs, the conclusion would be simple and lopsided. Real life is not. There are situations where a Chinese outboard is a rational, even smart choice. On small freshwater lakes where seasons are short, loads are modest, and hulls spend most of their time on trailers or lifts, a low-cost four-stroke with a cloned design can deliver many years of service without causing much trouble. The corrosion challenges are milder. The hours accumulate slowly. The likelihood of running into the limits of the casting, the coatings, or the support network is lower. In remote or economically constrained regions, a simple engine with minimal electronics can be easier to live with than a sophisticated system that demands expensive tools and specialized training. A local machinist can rebush a worn pivot, rebuild a carburetor, weld a cracked bracket. Those repairs may not match factory guidelines, but they keep boats moving where the alternative is no engine at all. There is also the simple fact that, for some owners, the choice is not between a Chinese outboard and an American outboard. It is between a Chinese outboard and nothing. Without the low entry price, they would never be on the water. For them, a decade of light use from a budget motor, even if resale is essentially zero, may be a perfectly acceptable outcome. Understanding these niches matters because they explain why so many genuinely satisfied stories circulate alongside all the cautionary ones. The problem is not that those stories are false. It is that they are often repeated without the context that made them work. Why American outboards still dominate the hard places. At the other end of the spectrum are owners whose boats see harsh duty. Charter skippers running multiple trips per day in salt and chop. Guides who operate in remote coastal marshes, commercial fishers who push heavily loaded hulls through tight weather windows. They care less about how an engine looks on delivery day and more about what it is like on the 1000th hour. In those worlds, American and other major brand engines maintain a strong presence because their design choices, coatings, tolerances, support networks, and fuel systems were built with that level of use in mind. When something does fail, parts and technicians are close enough that the boat can return to service without losing an entire season. When it comes time to sell, those engines still carry real, quantifiable value. Walk through a used boatyard and listen to buyers. They may argue aggressively about hull brands, layouts, and electronics. But when they lean in to study the outboard, the tone shifts. A 10-year-old American motor from a known brand with documented maintenance and visible care is a selling point. Even with high hours, there is a market for it as a standalone asset. A similar boat with a fading, unfamiliar imported engine bolted to the transom tends to sit longer or sells only after the price is cut, with the expectation that the buyer will replace the power. That moment at resale is one of the largest hidden cost differences between these choices. It is also one that almost no one thinks about when they are staring at a quote and trying to decide whether to save money now or spend it on the promise of fewer headaches later. The direction. This story is quietly moving. Looking ahead, the gap between these paths is unlikely to stand still. Major outboard manufacturers continue to invest in cleaner combustion, integration with digital, controls, advanced monitoring, and compliance with evolving regulations from agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency and state-level boards. Some of that investment goes into engines that will not be sold for years. Some of it goes into keeping current models legal and supportable in the face of tightening rules. Chinese manufacturers are not frozen either. A few are moving toward more sophisticated products with better coatings, tighter machining, and improved electronics. Their prices are rising accordingly. Others are staying with the formula that brought them this far, cloning older designs and selling into markets where regulations are loose and enforcement is inconsistent. For owners in jurisdictions with strong environmental laws, engines that never met modern standards may eventually bump into restrictions on where and how they can be used or sold. That pressure could make a higher initial investment in a compliant, well-supported engine feel less like an indulgence and more like insurance. None of this means that one side will win completely or that the other will disappear. It means that the line between better and cheaper will keep moving, and that decisions made in 1 year may look different when viewed in hindsight a decade later. The price every engine eventually demands. Strip away the marketing phrases, the flag decals, and the online arguments, and you are left with a simple fact. Every engine makes you pay its full price eventually. Some ask for more on the day you sign. Others spread the cost out across fuel, maintenance, replacement parts, downtime, and resale. Chinese outboards are genuinely cheaper at the start. In the right waters, with modest use and realistic expectations about resale, they can be the practical choice. They open the door to boating for people who would otherwise stay on the pier. If you understand their limits and operate within them, they can absolutely feel like you got away with something. American outboards charge more at the beginning because they carry the weight of research and development, quality control, corrosion testing, dealer training, and regulatory compliance. For owners who run often, who run in salt, and who care what their engine will be worth when they are done with it, that cost tends to come back in fewer failures. Better support, lower fuel burn, and a meaningful exit price when it is time to move on. Better and cheaper, in other words, are not universal labels. They only make sense when tied to where you run, how often you run, how long you plan to keep the engine, and how you feel about uncertainty bolted to the back of your hull. Would you run one of these, knowing not just what it costs to buy, but what it might cost in all the seasons that marketing never shows? Right now, in marinas and storage yards, whole boats are being sent back or traded away, not just because of cracked gel coat or tired upholstery, but because of what happened when the engines on their transoms tried to collect the rest of their price. In the next chapter, the stories behind those returns begin to line up, and the reasons they are exploding in the middle of this decade are stranger and more revealing than anything that fits on a spec sheet.